Mistress convinced billionaire to cut off his pregnant wife, but her evil plan backfired brutally. Have you ever wondered how far someone would go to steal another person's fortune and their happiness? This is the scandalous tale of Edward Brown, a charismatic millionaire, his devoted but pregnant wife Sophia, and the cunning mistress, Vanessa, who thought she could rewrite their destiny. From the outside, they seemed to lead a perfect life of lavish parties and business triumphs, but behind the glamour lurked deception, jealousy, and a thirst for control. Brace yourself for a roller coaster of high-stakes schemes, backstabbing friends, and heartbreaking betrayals as you discover how one woman's evil plan boomeranged, leaving her in utter ruin. Edward Brown was born in a modest home on the outskirts of Newark, New Jersey. He grew up believing in the power of dreams, particularly because his mother, Linda Brown, insisted that everyone had the right to aspire to greatness. Edward was an unremarkable student for much of his childhood, but he always had a certain spark, an unshakable determination that pushed him to excel beyond the limitations of his tiny bedroom. By high school, he was starting small businesses, selling vintage sneakers and refurbished electronics. Slowly amassing a meager profit, he poured right back into bigger ideas. After graduation, he went to college in Philadelphia, majoring in finance. A diligent student, Edward was known for his meticulous approach to every course project. His classmates often teased him for being too serious, too consumed by the complexities of numbers, investments, and margins. But Edward had a goal. He was convinced he'd find a way to succeed in business well beyond his peers' wildest imaginations. Even then, he discovered he had a certain charm, an ability to persuade both friends and mentors to see his vision. That intangible magnetism would become pivotal to his future success. By the time he was 28, Edward Brown was running a small but thriving financial advisory firm in New York City. It wasn't the largest or the flashiest, but it had grown at an impressive rate, earning him a comfortable lifestyle. He leased a sleek apartment on the Upper East Side and frequently attended upscale networking events. At one of these glitzy galas, he met Sophia Williams. Little did he know that this meeting would forever alter his path, presenting him with both profound joy and heartbreaking turmoil. Sophia Williams was the daughter of a retired investment banker, Richard Williams, a man known in Manhattan's elite circles for his sagacity and stern demeanor. Sophia was not just a woman of style and grace. She possessed an independent streak that set her apart. It was this spark of individuality, her intelligence, her tenderness, that first caught Edward's eye. They met at a black-tie charity fundraiser, bonding over their shared interest in philanthropic endeavors. With her wavy brunette hair and disarmingly bright smile, Sophia was a magnetic presence in any room. Their courtship moved swiftly. Within 6 months, Edward found himself planning an elaborate proposal at the top of the Empire State Building. Journalists who covered the social scene in Manhattan spoke of them as a power couple in the making, the ambitious financial entrepreneur and the benevolent, grounded heiress. They were unstoppable, or so it seemed. They married in a grand ceremony at the Williams family estate in upstate New York, attended by dignitaries, prominent socialites, and even a few celebrities. Despite the lavish spectacle, the highlight remained the couple's vows, a testament to how deeply they cared for each other's well-being, future, and dreams. In that moment, as Sophia's eyes shone with tears of joy and Edward's voice cracked with deep emotion, no one could have guessed how their love would be tested, and tested hard. Love, though powerful, can be fragile when faced with deception and manipulation in its boldest forms. After the wedding, Edward's business soared. With Sophia's father, Richard Williams, as a resource, Edward successfully navigated new territory. He expanded his small firm into a more significant enterprise, Brown Williams Financial Holdings. They soon opened offices in multiple cities, from Boston to Los Angeles, employing hundreds of bright, driven individuals. Edward became a rising star in finance, and with success came perks and temptations. High life in Manhattan meant glamorous parties, brand launches, and plush fundraisers. Edward and Sophia frequently found themselves on red carpets, invited to exclusive restaurants, or flying off to meet clients in Paris, London, or Dubai. It was hectic, but they enjoyed the thrill until cracks began appearing. Edward was constantly traveling, rarely home. Sophia found herself missing those quiet evenings when they shared dinner and future plans. People in Edward's circle marveled at how he juggled the demands of his business. Yet few realized that with every day he spent away from Sophia, their once unbreakable bond was weakening. At first, the distance was purely physical, but soon it seeped into their emotional dynamic. The rosy glow of a newlywed life faded into conference calls and urgent client meetings. It was around this time that Vanessa Smith appeared a new hire at Brown Williams. She was a brilliant wealth manager, recommended by a headhunter from London. Vanessa's credentials were impeccable, a graduate of the London School of Economics, with stints at renowned international banks. What wasn't immediately apparent was her knack for manipulation, her hunger for luxurious living, and the unstoppable ambition that drove her. She wasn't content with merely being a top executive. She wanted more. And when she saw Edward Brown, wealthy, powerful, and with a heart she thought was vulnerable, she set her sights on an audacious conquest. In her early days at Brown Williams, Vanessa played the role of the devoted, brilliant employee. She listened in strategy meetings with rapt attention, taking notes and asking just enough smart questions to prove her competency. She struck up friendly conversations with everyone, from the board members to the junior analysts. Her ability to network was impressive, and it wasn't long before she landed in Edward's good graces. At first, their relationship was strictly professional. Edward admired her intelligence, occasionally inviting her to important presentations to prospective clients. Impressed by her performance, he offered her a leadership position in the mergers and acquisitions department. Vanessa, of course, accepted. She started traveling with him to business conferences, Dubai, Hong Kong, Geneva, learning not just about deals, but also about how Edward's mind worked. It didn't take her long to pick up on certain vulnerabilities. Edward, though wealthy and successful, was still seeking validation. Growing up in a modest setting had imbued him with an underlying insecurity that manifested as a desire to conquer new horizons. Vanessa flattered his ambition, admiring his entrepreneurial genius. She listened closely whenever he vented about the stress of scaling the company. She discovered that Edward's wife, Sophia, was often absent at these conferences, preferring to stay home or manage philanthropic events. In Vanessa's eyes, that was an opportunity, an opening for her to slide into Edward's life more intimately. Slowly, she started crossing boundaries, sending flirty text messages after work hours, praising him in a way that felt more personal than professional. She'd pass by his office door with a suggestive smile, making sure he noticed her new designer suit. Step by step, Vanessa planted seeds of attraction, all while maintaining plausible deniability. Edward, unaware of how carefully orchestrated her approach was, found himself drawn to her. The line between professional admiration and emotional intrigue blurred dangerously. While Edward and Vanessa's bond solidified at work, Sophia was going through personal changes of her own. After years of trying, Sophia discovered she was pregnant. Elated, she hoped this news might bring Edward closer, rekindling the warmth they once shared. She dreamed of the day he'd feel their child kicking that he'd be as thrilled as she was about the prospect of parenthood. But as the months passed, Edward's presence at home grew even more fleeting, overshadowed by his business expansions and frequent travel. At first, Sophia made excuses. She understood how critical these business deals were. She'd reassure herself that Edward was doing it all for their future family. Yet, a nagging suspicion emerged whenever she'd catch him on the phone late at night, or see how unsettled he looked after reading certain text messages. There was an emotional distance that felt too vast. She tried talking to him about her pregnancy appointments, about baby names and decorating a nursery, but he responded with polite, strained enthusiasm. His mind was elsewhere. Sophia confided in her closest friend, Christine Dawson, who had known Edward for a few years. Christine sensed something was off. She saw the anxiety shadowing Sophia's usually radiant face. Rather than rely on speculation, Christine suggested that Sophia approach Edward directly. No accusations, just an open conversation about what was going on. Sophia resolved to do this, determined to fight for her marriage and the future of their child. Unknown to her, a hidden war for Edward's affection was already in motion, with Vanessa cunningly seizing every opportunity to undermine the marriage from within. Vanessa's plan gained momentum when Edward invited her to a high-profile investor summit in London. Normally, Sophia would have traveled with him, but her pregnancy had reached a stage where her doctor advised against long flights. Edward, though reluctant to leave his wife alone, saw no choice but to attend. Brown Williams was on the brink of a massive partnership, and his presence was essential. During the trip, Vanessa orchestrated chance encounters that were anything but accidental. She timed her arrivals and departures at the hotel to coincide with Edward's. She picked restaurants famous for their romantic ambience under the guise of business lunches. After one particularly successful day negotiating with European partners, Edward and Vanessa found themselves in the hotel lounge, sipping champagne to celebrate. The conversation drifted from business to personal lives. Vanessa, carefully revealing bits of her past that evoked sympathy, and Edward, expressing his frustrations about the emotional distance in his marriage. That night, entangled by alcohol and longing, Edward made a tragic mistake. He slept with Vanessa. In the immediate aftermath, guilt gnawed at him. He loved Sophia, or so he believed, and knew that one reckless act could jeopardize everything. Yet, Vanessa was patient and cunning. She didn't press him to choose her. Instead, she comforted him, whispered she understood. She painted Sophia as someone who was distant and disinterested, overshadowing Edward's needs. Unaware of her manipulation, Edward began to rationalize his betrayal, convincing himself it was a mere slip fueled by stress. But for Vanessa, that night was a milestone. It gave her an emotional leverage that she intended to exploit. With that intimate connection secured, she felt emboldened to take bigger steps that would ultimately lead to the downfall of Edward's marriage if she had her way. Upon returning to New York, Edward was ill at ease. Guilt racked him, especially when he saw Sophia quietly organizing the baby's room, folding little onesies, her face glowing with maternal pride. He swore to himself that the London incident would be the only time he ever cheated. But Vanessa was not about to let him escape that easily. She started sending flirty text messages, reminders of their night, photos of them smiling together at the summit. She would casually show up at his office door with a sly grin, as if sharing a private joke. Meanwhile, Sophia felt Edward's distance even more acutely. She tried to talk to him about their growing family, about doctor's visits, about the name she was considering for their baby if it were a girl, Emily. Edward, though present in body, seemed lost in thought. Late-night phone calls with clients became frequent. Sophia couldn't help noticing the sudden tension in the air. One evening, Sophia decided it was time for a heart-to-heart. She prepared his favorite dinner, lit a few candles, and waited for him to come home. Edward arrived late, exhausted, his tie undone. Seeing her efforts, he mustered a forced smile. They sat down, and she confessed her worries that he'd grown distant, that she felt lonely in this stage of pregnancy when she needed him the most. Edward, unsettled, tried to offer vague reassurances. Yet, in the back of his mind, he wondered what Vanessa would say if she knew he was trying to keep his marriage intact. After dinner, while Sophia was tidying up, Edward's phone buzzed. It was a text from Vanessa, "Missing you. Can't stop thinking about London." The words glowed ominously on the screen, and Sophia caught a glimpse over his shoulder. She saw Vanessa's name. She said nothing then, but inside, her heart froze in alarm. Over the coming weeks, Sophia's suspicions grew. She noticed how Edward's behavior changed whenever Vanessa's name was mentioned in company news. A professional partner had once praised Vanessa for her adept negotiation skills, and Edward couldn't hide a flicker of conflicted emotion in his eyes, pride or guilt. Sophia couldn't tell. She also realized how frequently Vanessa appeared in Edward's stories about work. Concerned for Sophia's well-being and increasingly alarmed, Christine Dawson discreetly started her own investigations. She had connections in the city's social circles, some of whom had spotted Edward and Vanessa together at odd hours. One friend in particular, Anita Howard, who worked at a luxury hotel in Midtown, revealed she had seen Edward and Vanessa checking in late one night, far from the time frame of any known corporate event. Christine wrestled with how best to deliver such devastating news, worried about Sophia's emotional state. Meanwhile, Vanessa grew bolder. She sensed that Edward was weakening under his guilt, that he wouldn't dare cut ties with her completely for fear she might spill the truth. She began planting the idea that Sophia was too wrapped up in her own affairs, that they were growing apart. "Sometimes people just aren't right for each other forever," Vanessa would say softly, brushing her hand against his shoulder. "It's nobody's fault. It's just life." Torn between love, guilt, and the looming threat of scandal, Edward started pulling away from Sophia physically and emotionally. Every time he looked at her swelling belly, he felt a mixture of wonder and dread. He wanted to be a good father, but he couldn't see how to extricate himself from the web Vanessa had woven. Above all, he told himself that if Sophia never learned the truth, he could still salvage what was left of their relationship. But he was wrong. Secrets rarely remain buried for long. The turning point came when Sophia discovered damning evidence of Edward's infidelity. He had inadvertently left his laptop open one night, and while closing the tabs, she saw an email thread between Edward and Vanessa. The language was intimate, referencing their time in London and plans for another rendezvous. Sophia read every line, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely think. Tears blurred her vision, but anger and betrayal surged through her like a raging current. After the initial shock, Sophia's first instinct was to confront Edward immediately. But a calmer voice inside advised caution. She took screenshots of the emails, forwarding them to herself. She needed undeniable proof should Edward deny everything. That night, she locked herself in the guest bedroom, claiming she didn't feel well. Edward barely noticed, preoccupied with his phone calls and obligations. Sophia spent those hours sobbing, recalling every sweet memory of their courtship, every vow they exchanged, every dream they'd spoken about for their future child. She felt nauseated, a swirl of heartbreak and fury. The next morning she decided to confide in Christine and her father, Richard Williams. Sophia was terrified, but she knew she couldn't face this alone. Christine, upon hearing the revelations, advised calm but decisive action. "Don't let Vanessa's manipulations break you," she told Sophia. "You have to protect yourself and your baby now." Richard Williams, known for his steely composure, listened quietly as Sophia recounted the betrayal. His jaw clenched, and a fierce resolve took hold of him. He told Sophia, "We'll handle this. But first, let me see exactly what evidence you have." The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of Edward's world, and Vanessa's cunning scheme was about to meet an unexpected challenge. While Sophia found her footing, Vanessa grew more ambitious. She had a chilling conversation with Edward one afternoon, insinuating that he'd be better off without Sophia. If he divorced her, especially before the baby was born, he could avoid a messy custody battle, or so Vanessa claimed. She pointed out that Sophia had her own wealth from her family, and that she'd do just fine without Edward's support. Vanessa painted divorce as a clean slate, a way for Edward to truly pursue his goals without emotional baggage. Under normal circumstances, Edward would have dismissed such talk as heartless. But the more time he spent enmeshed in his affair, the more distorted his viewpoint became. Vanessa tapped into his insecurities expertly, convincing him that his marriage was doomed and that he deserved a partner as driven and relentless as he was. She served as a toxic echo chamber, amplifying every petty grievance he'd ever had about Sophia. Emboldened, Vanessa also started dropping hints to co-workers, fueling the rumor mill that Edward's marriage was on the rocks. She cultivated allies within the company, promising promotions or inside information, ensuring that if a scandal erupted, she'd have supporters to back her narrative. Meanwhile, Edward's guilt was overshadowed by fear. If Sophia found out the truth, and deep down he suspected she might, he dreaded how it could destroy his personal life, his reputation, perhaps even the company's stability. He was equally terrified that Vanessa would expose their affair if he tried to end it. Vanessa noted his anxiety and offered comfort with false compassion, securing her hold over him. But neither Vanessa nor Edward realized that Sophia, far from being clueless, was systematically preparing to defend herself. She wasn't just a fragile, heartbroken wife. She was a woman backed by a formidable family, one that would not let her be humiliated without consequence. The day Sophia decided to confront Edward was a quiet Tuesday. The city's usual bustle seemed distant as she sat in the living room of their penthouse, her eyes fixed on the skyline. Edward walked in, looking drained. Before he could retreat to his study, Sophia asked him to sit down. Her tone was calm, but her posture indicated a seriousness Edward hadn't seen in months. She presented the evidence: screenshots of emails, text messages, and hotel check-in records. Edward went pale, his bravado shattered in an instant. He stammered, trying to conjure excuses, but the damning messages were there in black and white. Sophia demanded the truth. How long had it been going on? Was he in love with Vanessa? Did he ever consider their child's future before he betrayed her? Edward, reeling, confessed part of it. He admitted the one-night stand in London, then minimized everything else as an emotional fling, insisting it was over. Sophia calmly pointed out that Vanessa had been urging him to leave her, referencing messages that clearly showed an ongoing affair. At that moment, Sophia showed more composure than Edward had expected. In her heart, she was devastated, but she would not let the pain paralyze her. She gave him a choice: end all contact with Vanessa, commit to repairing their marriage, or lose everything. She wouldn't beg him to stay. She wouldn't degrade herself further. She simply stated the terms and awaited his reply. Conflicted, Edward promised to end it, but his resolve was half-hearted. He feared Vanessa's reaction and the fallout. Unbeknownst to both of them, an even bigger storm was brewing. Vanessa had already laid out a plan to corner Edward into making a final choice, and she wasn't about to let him slip away so easily. The next morning, Vanessa unexpectedly showed up at the Brown-Williams headquarters for a board meeting. Edward had planned to skip it, hoping to avoid her, but she cornered him outside the conference room, wearing a confident smirk. "We need to talk," she said, pulling him into an empty office. Sophia knows, Edward blurted before Vanessa could even begin. He explained the confrontation, the proof, and the ultimatum he'd been given. Vanessa listened with narrowed eyes. She feigned sympathy, touching his arm, but he jerked away. The tension was palpable, an uncomfortable mix of fear, anger, and smouldering attraction that Vanessa had skillfully nurtured. Vanessa insisted that if he cared about his own future, he'd do what was best and file for divorce. "She's just using the baby to trap you," Vanessa hissed. "Don't you see? You're meant for bigger things, Edward. We both are." Something about Vanessa's words made Edward recoil. He'd ignored it for months, but her coldness toward his unborn child struck him as monstrous. For the first time, he wondered if he was dealing with someone truly devoid of empathy. Vanessa sensed his hesitation. She switched tactics, threatening to release evidence of their affair to the press if he didn't comply. "You think your business will survive that scandal? You think your precious wife's father will let that slide?" Edward felt cornered, every bit of control slipping from his grasp. The woman he'd foolishly become entangled with was turning into a viper, and his loyal, pregnant wife, whom he'd betrayed, was waiting at home, giving him a shot at redemption. He had no clue how to navigate this. But Vanessa was about to discover that the Williams family had their own way of dealing with threats, and her manipulations were about to backfire in brutal fashion. Meanwhile, Richard Williams was not idle. After Sophia showed him the incriminating emails, he hired a private investigator, Jack Conrad, to dig deeper into Vanessa's background. Within a matter of days, Conrad uncovered disturbing details. Vanessa had a history of manipulative relationships. She'd once been engaged to a wealthy banker in London, only to break it off when a more financially stable prospect arose. There were also rumors she'd blackmailed a former manager over alleged harassment, walking away with a large settlement. None of it had been proven in court, but the patterns were obvious. Richard Williams was livid, but he maintained his trademark calm. He meticulously pieced together a dossier on Vanessa, documenting her previous cons and suspicious activities. His end goal was clear. If Vanessa dared to threaten Sophia and Edward's marriage, he would expose every detail, ruining her reputation in high finance circles forever. Furthermore, Richard had deep ties in Manhattan's legal community. A single call could unleash legal challenges Vanessa would struggle to overcome. Sophia, for her part, was preparing for a crucial doctor's appointment, a checkup for her pregnancy. She invited Edward, reminding him how important it was to hear the baby's heartbeat. Torn, Edward agreed to go. He knew he'd disappointed her in almost every way. Attending the appointment felt like the smallest step he could take to show he still cared. That afternoon in the clinic, hearing the soft, rapid thumping of their child's heartbeat, Edward felt tears burn his eyes. He realized that no matter how complicated things got, this was his baby part of him, part of Sophia. He saw the awe in Sophia's expression and sensed an unspoken question. "Will you truly be here for us?" He couldn't answer in words, but he squeezed her hand. Fueled by this emotional awakening, Edward tried to cut ties with Vanessa. He told her they couldn't be in contact outside strictly professional matters, that their relationship had crossed lines he deeply regretted. Predictably, Vanessa erupted in anger. She accused him of using her, throwing out all the carefully built illusions of romance. She threatened to expose him to the media, to the board, to his wife, anything to keep him under her thumb. Edward resisted initially, but Vanessa had recordings of their phone calls, as well as incriminating messages that proved a long-term affair. Any illusions that he could simply walk away vanished. He was trapped. Desperate, he reached out to Richard Williams, confessing the blackmail. Richard listened quietly, letting Edward pour out his shame and fear. Finally, Richard said, "Son, I don't like what you've done to my daughter, but I'm not letting that woman destroy our family. Now we do this my way." That night, Richard, Sophia, Edward and Christine strategized. They had the dossier on Vanessa, and they knew the board members at Brown Williams would never condone such destructive behavior if push came to shove. If necessary, they could file a lawsuit claiming she engaged in unethical conduct, sleeping with her married boss, blackmail, and more. But first, they wanted to offer Vanessa a chance to leave quietly. If she refused, they would unleash every piece of incriminating evidence. Sophia watched it all unfold with a mix of heartbreak and resolve. She was still furious at Edward, still uncertain if she could ever fully forgive him. But, for the sake of her child, she wanted to protect the family's future. Ironically, she now found herself on the same side as her unfaithful husband, combating the woman who tried to destroy their marriage. 2 days later, Vanessa received a summons to a private meeting at a midtown law firm, Bridges and Lancaster, which Richard Williams frequently used. When she arrived, she found herself in a sleek conference room facing Richard, Sophia, and 2 attorneys. Edward was notably absent. Vanessa braced herself. The formal setting, the stony expression on Richard's face, everything felt ominous. One of the lawyers handed her a thick envelope containing a summary of the evidence that Richard's investigator had gathered, details of her suspicious past relationships, claims of blackmail, and internal emails from the Brown Williams servers that showcased her manipulations toward Edward. She scanned the pages, her face paling. Still, Vanessa attempted a brave front. "You're bluffing," she sneered. "None of this proves anything illegal." Richard leaned forward, eyes cold. "Perhaps you're right, but it's enough to ruin your standing in the financial world. Enough to ensure no reputable firm ever hires you again. And if you continue harassing my daughter or my son-in-law, we'll release it all to the press. You'll spend your life dealing with defamation lawsuits. My attorneys will bury you." Vanessa realized she was cornered. She had planned to intimidate Edward with her own stash of evidence, but Richard's file was far more extensive and far more damaging. Moreover, she didn't know if Edward would side with her or the family now. She tried a final gambit. "Edward won't let you do this to me." Sophia spoke then, her voice trembling but resolute. "He already has." The ultimatum was clear. Vanessa could either tender her resignation, leave Edward alone, and disappear, or face total professional and personal destruction. With no allies left, Vanessa signed the provided documents on the spot, effectively ending her employment at Brown Williams. She left that conference room with trembling hands, humiliated and seething, determined to find a way to retaliate. In the aftermath of Vanessa's forced resignation, Edward faced the wreckage he'd caused. His relationship with Sophia was hanging by a thread. At times, she could barely look at him without tears welling up. Even so, she refused to let her heartbreak blind her to practical realities. She was months away from giving birth, and her health was paramount. Edward underwent a period of profound reflection. He distanced himself from social gatherings, focusing on therapy sessions recommended by Christine Dawson, who believed that deep-seated insecurities from Edward's upbringing contributed to his susceptibility. In these sessions, Edward began to confront the shame he felt for betraying his wife, the self-doubt that made him vulnerable to Vanessa's flattery, and the guilt that haunted him for risking his child's future. Sophia, too, sought counseling, grappling with the immense pain of infidelity. She wasn't sure if she wanted to stay married or file for divorce, but for the sake of her unborn baby, she was willing to entertain the possibility of reconciliation if Edward demonstrated genuine remorse and changed his behaviors. Throughout these turbulent weeks, Edward attempted to prove his commitment. He reduced his travel significantly, opting to conduct important business remotely. He was there for every doctor's appointment, learning about the baby's development alongside Sophia. He even took a sabbatical from Brown Williams, leaving trusted partners in charge. The board, aware of the turmoil, approved it in the hope that once Edward was back, he would be more stable and the company's reputation would remain intact. Vanessa, meanwhile, had vanished from the finance scene for now, but Sophia and Edward lived with the nagging fear that she might resurface. People with that level of ambition and cunning rarely accept defeat. They braced themselves for the worst, even as they tried to heal the wounds in their marriage. Weeks turned into months. Sophia's belly grew, and with it a cautious optimism. She and Edward had hard conversations late into the night about trust, about how he would handle confrontation rather than run from it. Edward apologized countless times, not just with words, but with actions. He organized small moments of intimacy like cooking her breakfast, reading up on pregnancy tips, and learning simple prenatal exercises to do together at home. Richard Williams kept a close eye on the situation. Though still disappointed in Edward, he acknowledged the man's efforts. More importantly, he saw how Sophia responded, slowly regaining her confidence, even if her heart remained guarded. Christine Dawson provided emotional support to her friend, reminding her to set boundaries. "You can forgive him one day, but you don't have to forget what happened," she advised. In an attempt to start anew, Edward planned a short getaway for himself and Sophia, nothing extravagant, just a weekend retreat at a countryside spa. He hoped a change of scenery might offer them a chance to reconnect away from the city's stressful environment. At the spa, they took gentle walks along a serene lake, ate farm-to-table meals, and engaged in long conversations that avoided business entirely. While there, they had a poignant moment, sitting by a crackling fireplace. Sophia turned to Edward, eyes glistening. "I don't know if I can ever fully erase this betrayal from my heart," she whispered. "But I do know I want our child to have a father who is present, loving, and honorable." Edward, voice choked with emotion, promised to be that father, to earn back her trust day by day. That night, for the first time in many months, they fell asleep in each other's arms, sharing quiet tears of both sorrow and a fragile, budding hope. Vanessa's reappearance was almost predictable, yet it still sent shockwaves through Edward and Sophia's life. It came in the form of a tabloid article that appeared one morning, painting a scandalous picture of Edward's affair with a mystery employee. The piece was filled with dramatic language, casting Edward as a predatory boss and Vanessa as a victim forced out of the company. It implied that the Williams family had covered up the scandal to protect their finances. Edward woke to a barrage of calls from colleagues and journalists seeking comment. Sophia's phone blew up with sympathetic texts from friends. In a panic, Edward feared their fragile peace would crumble under this sudden wave of negative publicity. Richard Williams stepped in immediately. He issued a statement through the family's attorney, clarifying that Vanessa Smith had resigned voluntarily due to unprofessional conduct, and any claims of her being coerced or mistreated were baseless. The statement hinted at the existence of legal documents that, if revealed, could discredit Vanessa's narrative. A few prominent reporters picked up on this, quickly dropping the story, reluctant to face a defamation lawsuit. Even so, rumors persisted in certain online forums and gossip sites, fueled by sensational speculation. Some people began painting Sophia as a helpless pregnant woman, and others pegged her as a ruthless heiress who crushed a rival. A swirl of public opinion took hold, but with a few strategic legal threats, the family managed to keep the mainstream media at bay. Amid the chaos, Edward stood by Sophia. He shielded her from invasive journalists, refusing to comment on personal questions. Though the article triggered anxiety for them both, it also served as a test of their newfound unity. With every call Edward declined, every non-disclosure agreement he reinforced, he affirmed his loyalty to Sophia, determined not to let Vanessa's final gambit break them apart. Exhausted from battling rumors, Edward and Sophia refocused on what mattered most: the imminent birth of their child. The following weeks brought an unexpected sense of peace. Despite the swirling gossip, the couple found solace in preparing the nursery, painting the walls in soft, soothing colors, assembling a crib, even picking out plush toys and storybooks. Edward surprised Sophia by taking an active interest in baby care. He read parenting books, practiced holding a doll to learn the right posture for feeding, and joined Sophia in prenatal classes. In one class, they found themselves laughing together as they clumsily practiced diaper changes on lifelike dolls. It was a small, heartwarming moment that signaled a gentle thaw in the tension that had gripped their marriage for months. Christine Dawson noticed a positive change in Sophia's demeanor. She was still cautious, not wanting to set herself up for heartbreak, but she was also less burdened by constant suspicion. Edward, for his part, seemed more grounded, less obsessed with the vanity of business success, and more focused on being a reliable partner and soon-to-be father. On a bright spring morning, Sophia's water broke unexpectedly. Edward rushed her to the hospital, heart pounding. In the delivery room, they endured long hours of labor fear, excitement, and anticipation intermingled. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy baby girl they named Emily, tears of joy and relief flooded Edward's eyes. He held Sophia's hand, whispering his gratitude, promising to love them both fiercely for the rest of his days. In that hospital room, for a brief moment, all the betrayal and drama were eclipsed by the miracle of new life. They were a family, bound by something far stronger than any affair or scandal could destroy if they chose to nurture it. Emily's arrival initiated a profound shift in Edward's worldview. Late-night feedings, diaper changes, and the quiet bliss of holding his sleeping daughter in his arms opened his heart in ways he never anticipated. He often marveled at Emily's tiny fingers curling around his own, feeling both protectiveness and regret that his child's earliest chapter was preceded by such turmoil. Sophia, though overjoyed at motherhood, was still processing her emotions. The postpartum weeks were challenging. Her body ached, her hormones fluctuated, and the memory of Edward's betrayal occasionally resurfaced in her dreams, leaving her anxious. She approached him cautiously, letting him care for Emily, but keeping a certain emotional distance. Edward respected her boundaries. He used every gesture, preparing her favorite tea, rocking Emily to sleep, taking over chores to demonstrate his willingness to rebuild trust. Richard Williams observed quietly, occasionally offering Edward guarded approval, but reminding him that true atonement takes time and consistency. Vanessa had gone silent, at least publicly. Rumor had it she relocated to Los Angeles, trying to rebuild her career under a different name. Yet, the Williams family's investigators kept tabs on her, ready to intervene should she attempt more mischief. With her financial resources nearly depleted, no new firm willing to risk hiring someone with her dubious track record, Vanessa's life had taken a sharp turn for the worse. All those lofty ambitions and manipulations ended up isolating her in a place where few dared to trust her. As the weeks turned into months, Sophia and Edward found a fragile, renewed rhythm. It wasn't the naive bliss of newlyweds, but rather a cautious partnership forged through adversity. Every time Edward cradled Emily, singing her lullabies in the soft glow of a nightlight, he remembered the vow he'd made to love and protect both mother and child, no matter the cost. As Emily reached 6 months old, Sophia finally agreed to couples therapy with Edward. They sat on a plush couch in Dr. Anderson's office, a space designed to feel warm and inviting. The sessions were emotionally grueling. Dr. Anderson prompted them to revisit the affair's impact, discussing how betrayal had eroded Sophia's self-esteem and trust. Edward confronted his guilt, acknowledging the selfishness and insecurities that led him astray. They learned communication tools, how to express anger without lashing out, how to listen actively without defensiveness. As the weeks passed, progress was tentative yet tangible. Sophia admitted she no longer felt a lump in her throat each time Edward's phone buzzed. Edward began to share his thoughts openly, no matter how uncomfortable. They even managed to laugh at small domestic mishaps, like when Edward burned toast while trying to make breakfast. Sophia also found healing in her role as a mother. She discovered that caring for Emily, witnessing her baby's innocent giggles, alleviated some of the pain. Motherhood filled her days with a sense of purpose that transcended her heartbreak. Edward admired Sophia's resilience, feeling grateful that she was giving him a second chance, albeit on thin ice. Though they weren't fully healed, both recognized that they had come a long way. The scandal that once threatened to tear them apart had, in a strange way, forced them to confront their relationship's deepest flaws. Edward was determined never to let complacency creep in again. He realized that genuine commitment wasn't about grand gestures or wealth. It was about daily, conscious choices to remain faithful, supportive, and loving. A year after Emily's birth, Brown Williams Financial Holdings organized its annual gala in Manhattan, an event that had been postponed the prior year due to Edward's sabbatical and the family drama. This time, Edward and Sophia attended together, stepping onto the stage as a couple, arms intertwined. Whispers coursed through the crowd. Many remembered the rumors, the sensational tabloid story. Yet, seeing them united, proud parents sparked admiration and curiosity about how they had weathered the storm. Edward used his speech to focus on the company's philanthropic ventures, announcing new scholarships for underprivileged students in Newark, his hometown, and robust family leave policies for employees. He deliberately avoided any personal references to the scandal. Still, his sincerity shone through as he spoke of second chances and the importance of loyalty, both in business and in life. Sophia, dressed in an elegant gown, mingled with guests, smiling politely. She still felt a pang of discomfort in large social settings. The memory of Vanessa's infiltration into their marriage lingered, but time had given her a thicker skin, and she found solace in the genuine warmth of old friends like Christine Dawson, who was now engaged and joked about how complicated wedding planning could be. By the end of the night, Edward and Sophia shared a quiet dance. Amid the swirl of glittering lights and murmuring guests, they moved in slow circles, foreheads nearly touching. "Thank you for standing by me," Edward whispered, voice trembling. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Sophia responded with a soft smile. She knew they still had work ahead of them, but in that moment, his arms around her and her heart beating steadily, she felt a sense of hope. A sense that their marriage, though battered, might emerge stronger for having survived a near-fatal storm. In the months that followed, life found a new normal for the Browns. Edward returned to work on a part-time basis, determined not to slip back into old patterns of overwork and emotional neglect. He blocked off time every evening to be home for dinner with Sophia and Emily, reading bedtime stories to his daughter and ensuring that he and Sophia had a moment to talk about their day without distractions. Sophia pursued a passion project. She set up a small charity focusing on maternal health, collaborating with local hospitals to provide resources for expecting and new mothers who lacked adequate support. The charity garnered recognition, with Christine joining as a board member to help with the administrative and fundraising aspects. Sophia's father, Richard Williams, offered guidance but let her run it independently, respecting her autonomy. This project gave Sophia a renewed sense of purpose and identity beyond the confines of social obligations and marriage. Despite the forward momentum, there were occasional setbacks. Every so often, Sophia would have flashbacks, little triggers that reminded her of Vanessa. A simple mention of London or a text message arriving late at night could prompt a pang of anxiety. But Edward remained patient, always willing to reassure her, never dismissing her concerns as unfounded. Through therapy, they learned to communicate such fears openly. Whenever doubts arose, they confronted them together instead of letting them fester in silence. The memory of the betrayal was still there, but it no longer dominated their interactions. Each day was a choice to trust anew, to nurture a family life they both cherished. Meanwhile, rumors floated that Vanessa had taken a series of short-lived consulting gigs on the West Coast, each ending amidst controversy. In a strange twist of fate, her own ambition had backfired. She'd alienated too many influential people. For Edward and Sophia, news of her continued downfall reinforced a lesson. No fortune or scheme built on Dissay it could ever truly stand. As time passed, the formidable scars began to fade. Sophia noticed that she rarely checked Edward's phone anymore, and Edward found he no longer felt compelled to hide any part of his day from her. Their emotional wounds were healing, stitched together by consistent acts of love, respect, and honest communication. The couple decided to renew their vows in a small, intimate ceremony on the second anniversary of Emily's birth. They invited only close friends and family, gathering in the garden of the Williams family estate upstate. The ambience was the polar opposite of their grand, showy wedding. This time, the ceremony was modest but deeply meaningful. Wearing a simple white lace dress, Sophia walked down a makeshift aisle, holding Emily's hand. Edward stood by a small arch adorned with fresh flowers, tears in his eyes as he watched them approach. When they reached him, Emily giggled, sensing the affectionate mood. Before their closest loved ones, Edward spoke words of contrition and devotion, acknowledging the pain he had caused and promising to spend the rest of his life honoring Sophia's trust. Sophia, with a trembling voice, responded with an affirmation that while scars remain, she believed in the power of redemption and love. The exchange felt cathartic, a quiet but firm closure on the darkest chapter of their relationship. As they sealed their renewed commitment with a kiss, onlookers wept tears of joy. Richard Williams, stoic as ever, gave a nod of approval. Christine snapped photos with a broad smile, capturing the moment that symbolized hope and rebirth. That evening, a soft twilight settled over the estate, and the family celebrated with a simple dinner under string lights. Edward held Sophia's hand, a sense of calm washing over them. They weren't naive. They understood that marriage would always require vigilance and care. But in that tranquil moment, surrounded by the few who truly mattered, it felt as though they had finally emerged from a long, harrowing storm, ready to embrace whatever dawn awaited them. The story of how Vanessa Smith had tried to manipulate Edward Brown into leaving his pregnant wife was never fully buried, at least among certain circles. It remained a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. But for Edward and Sophia, the story was no longer a scandal overshadowing their future. It was a painful lesson that had ultimately fortified their commitment. Their life continued. Emily grew into a curious toddler, toddling around the penthouse, filling it with squeals of laughter. Edward and Sophia took her on trips to the park, delighted by her fascination with everything from pigeons to ice cream trucks. They soaked in these ordinary moments with gratitude, acutely aware of how close they'd come to losing it all. Brown Williams Financial Holdings thrived under new management practices. Edward instituted practices emphasizing ethical oversight and employee well-being. He no longer relied on a single ambitious star like Vanessa to drive deals. Instead, he cultivated teamwork and transparency. The board noticed the positive culture shift and praised Edward's new leadership style. Sophia's charity blossomed too, earning commendations from local non-profits. She frequently spoke at conferences, sharing her journey from heartbreak to purpose. Though she never named Vanessa or delved into explicit details of Edward's infidelity, she acknowledged that personal trials shaped her resolve to help other women in vulnerable stages of motherhood. And so, life found a calmer rhythm, one that still held challenges, but none so dire as the crisis they had overcome. With each passing year, Edward and Sophia built fresh memories, gradually placing the drama of the past into a perspective that no longer defined them. In quiet moments, they would reflect on how an evil scheme, born from greed and deception, had ironically led them to discover the strength of their own love. It was a lesson they'd never forget. A few years later, an unexpected letter arrived at Brown Williams' office. It was from Vanessa Smith, postmarked from a small town in Arizona. In it, she apologized, though not profusely. She admitted that her life had spiraled after the scandal, leading to isolation and financial hardships. A mixture of bitterness and regret seeped through her words. She wrote that she'd been forced to re-evaluate her choices. She claimed to be working at a local bank now, trying to piece her life back together. Edward felt a jolt of conflicting emotions reading her letter. Part of him remembered the fear, the anger, the betrayal. Another part felt pity for the woman who had almost destroyed his marriage. He showed the letter to Sophia, who read it silently, then folded it neatly. "She has her own battles to fight," Sophia said calmly. "It's not our responsibility anymore." They chose not to respond. Neither sought revenge. Vanessa had already faced the consequences of her actions. Instead, they filed the letter away, letting it be a reminder of a dark chapter they had managed to transcend. For Edward, it reaffirmed the value of living with integrity. For Sophia, it underscored the resilience she'd gained by holding on to her dignity even when she was most vulnerable. Time marched on. Emily began preschool, then kindergarten. The joyous chaos of parenthood replaced the turmoil that once consumed them. Every so often, Edward would catch himself staring at Sophia, marveling at the quiet strength that radiated from her strength that had carried them both through a tempest of deceit and heartbreak. He felt a humility that prompted him to place his family's needs above all else. In that humble gratitude, the ghosts of the past gradually lost their power, replaced by a genuine contentment that defied every scheme Vanessa Smith had once spun. On a bright summer day, Edward, Sophia, and little Emily decided to visit Edward's mother, Linda, back in Newark. It was a modest neighborhood, one Edward had surpassed financially long ago, but it still held precious memories. Linda greeted them with open arms, marveling at her granddaughter's energy and vibrant storytelling. Over a home-cooked meal in the small, cozy kitchen, Linda commented on how the family had grown closer since the last time she saw them. She'd heard fragments of the turmoil from rumors and phone calls, but witnessing Edward's attentive care for Sophia and Emily calmed her worries. She pulled Edward aside at one point, whispering that she was proud of him. Her son had stumbled, but he'd found the humility and strength to fight for his family. Edward's eyes brimmed with tears at her praise. That afternoon, they strolled through the neighborhood park, where Edward once played pickup basketball. He hoisted Emily onto his shoulders, pointing out the old swings and benches. Sophia walked beside him, her hand occasionally brushing his. There, in the gentle hum of ordinary life, they felt an overwhelming sense of peace. They had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and near collapse. Yet here they stood, united by love, by shared commitment, and by a small child who symbolized a hopeful future. Walking through a park that echoed with Edward's childhood memories, they were reminded that life's greatest achievements weren't measured by bank accounts or corporate success, but by the bonds that endure in the face of every adversity. Edward and Sophia chose not to respond to Vanessa's final letter, which arrived unexpectedly at Brown Williams months after her disappearance. Postmarked from a small Arizona town, the letter blended bitterness and regret, confirming that her life had unraveled following her failed scheme. In it, Vanessa claimed to have taken humble jobs, struggling to regain financial stability after being universally shunned by high-level firms. Reading her words filled Edward with conflicting emotions, pity for her dire state, but also relief that she no longer held sway over his life. Sophia, too, felt a tinge of empathy, yet remained firm. Their family had finally found peace, and she would protect it at all costs. Time marched forward, and Emily, now an energetic teenager, brought fresh purpose to her parents' lives. With each milestone, school recitals, family holidays, weekend picnics, Edward and Sophia realized how fleeting their past crisis felt compared to the joy of raising their daughter in a loving, stable home. They had endured public scandal, vicious rumors, and private heartbreak, only to emerge with a deeper comprehension of trust and perseverance. While the gossip surrounding Vanessa's betrayal lingered in Manhattan's social circles, it mattered less with every passing year. On Emily's high school graduation day, Richard Williams and longtime friend Christine Dawson gathered to celebrate. Amid proud shouts and cheers, Edward and Sophia watched their daughter step onto the stage to receive her diploma, memories of their former turmoil mingling with the sheer wonder of how far they had come. A sense of awe filled them as they recalled the near destruction of their marriage, a catastrophic storm sparked by deception and fueled by poor choices. Yet seeing Emily, radiant in her cap and gown, made it clear that their future was no longer defined by that dark chapter. Later, at a small family dinner, they toasted Emily's bright path ahead. Edward thanked Richard for his steadfast support, acknowledging that without the Williams family's intervention, he might have lost everything. Christine snapped photos while recounting her own wedding plans, a moment of levity that contrasted sharply with the somber days gone by. As laughter rippled around the table, Sophia squeezed Edward's hand, an unspoken reminder that genuine love, once battered, can still heal with enough remorse and care. Finally, reflecting on their journey, Edward and Sophia recognized that their bond had matured beyond mere romance. It was forged through trials that tested their vows, forcing them to choose honesty and unity over pride and isolation. Vanessa's scheme had indeed backfired brutally, shattering her own ambitions and leaving her grasping for a second chance far from New York's glittering lights. Meanwhile, the Browns stood together, strengthened by empathy, accountability, and the daily choice to uphold the family they almost lost. In that gentle triumph, their past served less as a source of pain and more as a powerful reminder. Even amid betrayal, remorse and resilience can guide one toward redemption, if the heart, however wounded, remains determined to heal. And so ends this gripping tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimate redemption. What began as a toxic web spun by a cunning mistress became the crucible in which Edward and Sophia discovered the real meaning of love, family, and loyalty. Their journey teaches us that no matter how dark the situation or how powerful the manipulator, faith, resilience, and collective effort can prevail. From Sophia's remarkable courage to Edward's late but genuine remorse, we see that hope can rise from the ashes of shattered trust. If you found this story stirring, if you believe in the power of second chances and the triumph of sincere love over greed, then remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Help us spread more stories that remind us of the strength of the human heart and the incredible ability we have to overcome the greatest adversities. Thank you for watching.